backstories. A little bit of backstory. My neighborhood has recently had a series of break-ins, ranging from cars getting broken into in broad daylight at our neighborhood pool to having people's garages broken into. This isn't an unusual occurrence, as some sort of break-ins usually happens every summer. Recently, a house in the back of my neighborhood was targeted, but luckily they had a security camera set up in the corner of their garage. The family sent the video to the neighborhood watch, who then sent it to basically everyone in the neighborhood with the title Carpet Creeper. The video is pretty unsettling because you see a tall, lanky, older looking man walk up from the dark into the open air carpet. He was wearing a hat and sunglasses, even though it's pitch black outside. In the video, he walks with his back to the car and runs his hands along the car. He then walks around to the other side of the car and does the same thing, where he runs his back alongside it. Then you see him walk near the side door to the house, bend down and sort of crawl on the ground. He lingered in the carpet for around 8 minutes just walking around and touching things, and all he ended up stealing was a pair of nice tennis shoes from the homeowner, left outside their house. So flash forward to tonight. My house has an open air carpet with a security light that is supposed to flash on when someone walks underneath it. With this being said, it's incredibly old and doesn't usually work as quickly as it's supposed to. Around 11:30 p.m., I took my dog out for a walk and the carpet light didn't come on, but I didn't think much of it, so I just turned my iPhone flashlight on to guide the way. After about 10 minutes of letting my dog walk around, I headed back down my driveway, noticing that the light was now on, but I figured it had just kicked on late. I went inside my house, locked the door, and walked directly to the sink to make a glass of water. I was about to walk down the hallway directly to my bedroom, but had remembered I had left my phone charger in the living room. As I turned around, I saw a tall, lanky man standing on my carpet. He was just standing there in between my parents' cars. I literally froze with fear as my back was pressed to the fridge and looked through the front door about 15 feet away, which is all glass, so it was a clear view. The man literally just stood there, as still as a statue, and a smile began to curl up his lips. And it was so fucking terrifying because he had sunglasses on, so I couldn't tell if he was looking right at me. It felt like the staring contest went on for minutes, but it was probably only 5 seconds before he bolted out of my carport and back out into the driveway. I started crying because the thought of the man with at least a foot in height on me being in the same carport hiding behind a car as I walked my dog in and opened the door to my house absolutely terrified me. My parents called the police, but they couldn't do anything because the man ran away. I am now scared shitless to take my dog out at night again. My apartment complex is a nice, well-maintained building, surrounded by beaten-down, high-crime neighborhoods. My apartment complex has gates surrounding them that can only be opened by a member or by calling a resident and having them manually let you in. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible for trespassers to find their way inside the gates. One night at about 10 or 11 p.m., I pulled into my apartment after spending some time at my fiance's house. My roommate had taken the parking spot in front of our building, so I was forced to park off to the side of the buildings in an uncovered spot. It was a short walk to the apartments, but when I got out of my car, I realized that the lights in front of my apartment building were turned off. The building directly across from the building still had their front lights on, so I had figured that the bulbs were being replaced at 11 p.m. I was lucky that the lights from the other building illuminated parts of the pathway to my apartment, but my anxiety flared up and my imagination began to run wild. I pictured masked murderers jumping out from the shadows and whisking me away to a secondary location. My keys found their way between my knuckles as I created a makeshift weapon against the creatures that go bump in the night. I was so wrapped up into my own nightmares as I power walked into my building that I didn't realize someone was standing in front of me until I was almost on top of him. His back was turned towards me and his head was down. I thought he was lighting a cigarette and that was the reason for his strange pose. When I took a step or two closer, his head flipped around and he was staring at me as if I was a ghost. He was wide-eyed and looked like an animal caught in a trap, facing a hunter. I literally jumped, but did my best to maintain my composure. My apartment complex is very small, and I have made sure to learn the faces of my neighbors. I didn't recognize this man as living in the complex, and he seemed as though he was homeless. His hair was long and unruly, and he had a beard with bits of matter clinging to his scraggly hair. His clothes were obviously worn, and he was wearing a jacket too big for him, and too heavy for the Arizona weather. I continued walking, my grip tightening around my keys in my hands, just in case. I neared the staircase that led to my apartment, and turned back when I felt eyes burrowing into me. The man stood where I had left a few yards away, but he had twisted his body so that his arms were frozen above his head, and one of his legs looked as though he was about to jump away. The whole contorted look made him look as though he was dancing the Running Man, but he was completely frozen, with his eyes glued to me as I moved for the stairs. We stood staring at each other. He looked like a screenshot of a 90s dancer, and I'm sure I looked like a drowned rat. I squeaked out an apology for interrupting him and ran up the stairs and into my apartment. I stood by my door, locking the peephole to see if he had followed me, one hand holding my cell with 911 ready, and the other wrapped around the baseball bat my fiancé had left me after the previous encounter at my complex. Thankfully, he didn't go up the stairs, and I was left with nothing but a bizarre story to retell. I did end up calling the apartment complex's manager, and he had informed me that the security officer was on his way to investigate. One time when I was a kid, my parents were getting ready to go on a trip for the weekend and leave me at home. I got a phone call on our home phone, and somebody asked if my mom was there, asking for her by name. Well, my name sounds very similar to my mom, so I thought they were asking for me. "This is she," I answered. Well, we didn't get very far into the conversation before I realized the mistake I made. He thought he was speaking to my mom. I should have just corrected him, but I was a bit socially awkward, so I figured I'd just end the call and never bring it up again. He then asked me if I was my husband. I told him no, he'll be away for the weekend. He then lowered his voice and told me,
"Well, I already know your mom won't be home this weekend, and I know your dad won't be either. You really shouldn't tell strangers things like that."
Then he hung up. I was petrified, but I was too scared to tell my parents because I didn't want to get in trouble for accidentally pretending to be my mom, so they left on their trip. I spent the entire weekend on edge, constantly making sure my windows and doors were locked, and keeping my dogs by my side every second, until I heard a crash in the basement. Unmistakable. There's a gate, so I know my dogs couldn't have been down there. I immediately called the police, as my parents told me to do so if I ever heard noises in the house. I waited for the police to show up hiding in my closet, ready to wet myself from fear. The police eventually showed up after about 10 minutes, and they investigated the basement and found no sign of anything. To this day, I have no idea what happened that weekend. Whether or not the crash was a coincidence, and the man was just a family friend trying to teach me a lesson about pretending to be my mom, whether someone found their way into the house but was scared off when they heard me call the police, nothing ever came out of it. But I still shudder to think what could have happened to me that weekend. I still don't like to be alone in the house over 10 years later. I work at a grocery store pulling carts and bagging things. It's a shitty job, but it pays the rent. I'm a 20-year-old female. I have posted about strange customers before, but this guy, he's a repeat offender. This has been going on for about 6 months. 6 months ago, I'm standing in the liquor section, dusting the bottles and making sure the display looks nice. A man about 10 or so years older than me enters the section and asks me to recommend him something. I answer honestly that I am 20 years old and therefore know nothing about alcohol. Yes, I've had it before, but I know jack shit about what's good and what isn't.
"Are you sure you're not 21?
He asked. Yeah, I'm sure.
That's a shame.
He says.
I could show you a good time if you were old enough.
And then he winks. I just kinda laughed awkwardly, not knowing what to do. Then I pretend someone needs me over in another section and scurry off. I brushed it off thinking that it'd be the last I heard from him. 2 months later, I'm picking up the slack for my sick coworker and stocking the shelves in his absence. It's about 10 at night and the store is dead quiet. I normally like these times because it gives me time to myself. I'm rearranging some cereal boxes to look nice when someone taps me on the shoulder. I jump and turn around. It's the guy. Generally, it's kind of a faux pas to touch random retail workers you don't know, but this guy didn't have a care in the world about that.
Are you 21 yet?
He asks. I shake my head no, remembering where I had seen him before. I ask him if he needs help finding anything.
No.
He says.
I just wanted to know if you were 21 yet.
And he turns and walks off without another word or without grabbing any merch from the shelves. He may have bought something later from another aisle, but I sure as hell didn't stick around to find out. 3 weeks later, I'm bagging in one of the check stands when he comes through again, posing the same question. I again answer no. And since there's a lot of people around, that's the end of it. And now, last week, I'm marking down a service walk about 7 in the morning. Basically, that means I walked to the store and made sure that there were no messes or safety issues. I'm at the customer service desk alone, and my back is turned. I hear someone clearing their throat and turn around.
Are you 21 yet?
He asks. He's staring intently, like he's trying to will me to suddenly be 21, and once again answer no. I am not 21. He scowls at me.
Are you sure?
He asks me again. Oh yes, I am quite sure. Thank you very much. Thankfully, my manager swoops in to take care of what he needed, and I get the fuck out of Dodge. I've told my managers about this dude, and they don't really seem to care. For now, he hasn't done anything but creep on me hardcore, but I worry. I was recruited by an agency when I was in college, around the age of 19. I never had an interest in it prior to the agency offer, so I was an industry novice but accepted the opportunity due to the earning potential. I have since retired from the industry and seriously wised up. When I first began, all of my photo shoots, fashion shows, and promo events were coordinated through my agency. I will admit, I was naive at the time and had little to no background on the industry. About 3 months after signing with my agency, I got contacted on my personal email from a photographer who was interested in booking me for a shot. It was odd, as I did not have social media or have my personal email and my phone number posted online for potential booking agents. However, I shrugged it off. Everything up until the point was all agency-based. The photographer was interested in building his portfolio and was offering $100 an hour for a high-fashion nature shoot. I was new myself and also looking to build my portfolio and make some extra money for only 2 hours of work. Because of that, I agreed to book the shot without the knowledge of my agency, as I did not want to sacrifice the 15% agency fee that they'd take. The shoot was scheduled at a nature reserve about 30 minutes from my university. Due to the nature of the shoot, the photographer was able to provide wardrobe, but not hair and makeup services. I was sent images of the wardrobe beforehand and approved based on the modesty of the apparel. When I arrived at the shoot, the photographer met me to show me the location he wanted to shoot at. No immediate red flags went off because it was more scenic off of the trails. His camera, wardrobe bag, and a few reflectors were brought along with us. I followed the photographer into the woods, and the further we trekked off the trails, the more nervous I became. About 20 minutes into our trek through the woods, the photographer decided to set up camp at a woodsy, remote location. He took out the wardrobes and expected me to change right there in front of him. The wardrobe looked nothing like the photos he had sent me. This hardcore bondage apparel. In addition to this, his behavior was odd. I could not exactly identify what it was about him that made me feel uneasy, but my gut was telling me that something wasn't right. The first red flag was the absence of his assistant and how unprofessional he seemed. After about 10 minutes of arguing about changing in front of him, he finally gave in and walked deeper into the forest to let me change. I honestly had no intentions of shooting in that attire, but I needed to get him to leave due to the aggressive tone he began taking. I heard him cussing and grunting under his breath as he walked a ways into the woods to give me privacy. At that point, I left with haste, dropped the money and wardrobe, and ran through the woods to my car. When I finally made it to my car, I could hear him running and yelling at me. I tore ass out of the nature reserve and did not look back. About 10 minutes later, I got a text that consisted of a number of nonsensical numeric characters and one that simply said LOL. When I got home, I saw one final text from him. He told me that I was missing out on a good time and that he was planning on having a good time with me in more ways than one. I called my service provider to have his number blocked immediately. I received approximately 20 emails from him about 1 month after the incident. I did not open them and sent them straight to my trash can. So after he completely removed all of his profiles from industry websites, I'm truly hoping that nobody had an experience like the one I had with him, and further, I'm truly hoping that he did not harm any other model who worked for him. I certainly learned my lesson after that, and have since gained an incredible sense of personal institution. Recently, I moved to an island in the South Pacific and had gotten the hiking bug, so I try and get out to new locations as much as possible. This happened about 2 weeks ago. Since I live in the South Pacific region, it gets mighty hot driving all by the most insane hikers indoors unless it's at night. Of course, I'm not a masochist, so I try to do all my hiking in the early hours of the morning or in the evening when it starts getting cool. I've never been afraid of going hiking by myself. I did it when I lived in Oregon and never ran into any problems with it. But my island isn't my friendly home state. I always carry pepper spray, and I used to go hiking in Montana and Wyoming and would sometimes carry a handgun to ward off anything I could not take on, whether it was a bear or a person. But I had always gotten off considerably lucky. I got to the trailhead at about 6:30 in the evening. The trail was called 1,000 Steps, but in all honesty, it was mostly just a walk straight down to the cliff and then a grueling journey back up. I did not want to go, but my dog, Mad Moxie, needed to be walked, and I had done the hike so many times I could probably do it in my sleep. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up was an old, rickety, rusted-out blue pickup truck with a plastic tarp over the bed to keep out the rain. These are pretty common on the island, affectionately earning them the name Guam Bombs. As I hooked up Moxie and started heading down the trail, trying my best to ignore the mosquitoes that were making a meal out of my exposed neck. Heading down the trail was relatively easy. Avoiding the banana spider webs, I felt the stress of my day slowly unwind as the underbrush grew darker and night approached. I made it all the way down to the water's edge when I noticed a man standing about 100 yards away. It was dark enough now that I could only see his silhouette, so I have no idea if he was looking at me or at the water, but I chose to ignore him and instead pull Moxie's ball from my backpack and throw it for her a few times to get her wiggles out. After some time, the man started walking over to me and stopped maybe about 10 feet away. Now, I'm a fairly tiny woman. I'm 23 years old and I stand about 5'6", and this guy was just a couple of inches taller than me, but most of the locals were on the smaller side. But something about him just felt weird. Evening, I greeted as he nodded and looked down at Moxie, who had just returned from running after her ball. I swooped down to pet her now sweaty head as the man kept his eyes trained on my dog. "Can I help you, sir?" "Pretty dog," he responded mildly. "You are alone?" "I have my dog," I said lamely, trying to sound braver than I was feeling. "I'm never alone." I tried to emphasize on the fact that I had a dog with me, but the man seemed unfazed by my statement. "Oh, have a good night." With that, he turned around and started walking back towards the trailhead. I watched the shadow disappear into the trees and waited for about half an hour before I too started walking back towards the path, my mind on high alert as Moxie pulled me through the trees and up the cliffside. The crickets pierced the night as I climbed the steps, illuminated by my flashlight. My hands were full with Moxie's leash and my light, but you can bet your buns that I would have pepper spray out if I had an extra hand. Finally, my light pierced the trees at the top, and I practically booked it up the hill. When I got to the top, I nearly shat myself. The rusted blue pickup was sitting in the parking lot still, but the passenger side door was practically touching my car's driver's side. Inside the car, I could faintly see two men sitting in the cab, and I could feel them watching me. Slowly, I approached my car, walking as far over to the passenger side as I could, and kept Moxie with me as close as I opened the door and crawled over to the driver's side. The door of the pickup truck flew open, and my dog started going apeshit, barking at two people who were now outside of their car, trying to break into mine. Hard in my chest, I rammed the keys into the ignition and turned out of the parking lot so quick I nearly took my mirror off. I called my mom as soon as I got home, and she begged me to call the police. Unfortunately, the police here on this island aren't as vigilant as they are on the mainland, and that area is known for car thefts, mugging, and other debaucheries, as I learned from my co-workers later that week. Earlier this month, another girl actually disappeared from the area without a trace, and it makes me wonder if the men in the blue pickup truck had something to do with it. If I did not have Moxie with me, I would have been mugged or worse. If I learned anything from this experience, it's that for my lady hikers, please always take pepper spray with you. Go hiking in groups and always let someone know where you are going. It might save your life someday. And to the men in the pickup truck, let's never meet again. I did call the cops about the missing female in the truck I saw. They said that they would investigate into it. So far, I haven't heard anything. Also, I realize that hiking alone, especially as a female, is a dangerous pastime, and I do realize again how foolish and naive I was being. But I have learned and plan not on hiking alone anymore. This happened a few nights ago. I'm a 25-year-old female, 15 pounds, and I was out with my thoroughbred, Shane, doing fitness work on the cross-country course, and we were getting ready to head in from an evening of hard work. It wasn't dark, but was slowly getting there, prompting me to head in for the day. As we were walking around the area we had been working, my horse started refusing to go near a patch of woods. We had gone by it several times that evening, so I urged him forward to investigate. It was then that I heard what I believed to be a human voice. I realized somebody had been watching us the entire time. This property is on 700 acres, and this section was nowhere near a road, so this person had very intentionally made their way very close to where a rider could potentially be. I did not want to startle the horse, so I calmly turned him around and began a fast walk around that patch of woods, giving it a very wide berth, heading straight back to the main barn. As I got to the middle of the field, however, Shane halted, and although by then it was almost dark, I realized something. There were people in the woods across the field in front of me too, which is where my safest exit was located. So now I have somebody in the woods 50 yards or so behind me, and what sounded like multiple people in the woods 50 yards or so in front of me. I briefly considered taking the other exit route, but as I mentioned before, this was very far off the road, so my immediate thought process was that they did not walk there. Yes, Shane and I could have beat them to the gate, but if they had a vehicle or some sort, they could have caught up as I was opening it. We stood there for 30 seconds and simultaneously came to the conclusion, if we go now, we will beat them. We basically bolted across the field, slowed down slightly to cross a ditch in the woods, and flew through the gate just beyond it. I jumped off, unlatched the gate, and did not even stop to mount the horse. I just grabbed his reins, and together we bolted to the barn. Within 20 yards or so, we were hearing distance and started hollering, "There's people out there at the entrance gates, guys, come here." As soon as I started making a fuss, a four-wheeler started up from just behind the gate and hauled ass away. A police report was made, and the next day there was evidence found of 2 four-wheelers, so that makes sense since I was seeing people basically surrounding me. We aren't going to stop riding out there, but the barn owners are taking some precautions, and we won't be out there alone or at night anymore for a while. They may have just been teenagers looking to scare a rider, but either way, not cool. And the fact that they were trying to sneakily block my exit route, I can't imagine intentions were pure. Thank God for my hypersensitive horse. Without him forcing me to pay attention, I might have never noticed the people, especially the ones in front of me moving in the woods. Shane was a good boy that day. So this is the story of a bunch of dumb teenagers who were tormented in the deep woods. A long back story, but worth it. I was an 18-year-old high school senior and was about 3/4 of the way through the year. I had moved that year and switched to a school about 30 minutes away from where I used to go. I stayed in touch with a few people from my old school and got invited to go camping with a few of them over Memorial Weekend, which basically meant getting drunk as hell in the forest. I invited 2 girls and 1 guy from my new school to come hang out for a night and meet them in the closest town from the campsite, about 40 minutes away. The guy, Jeremy, hopped in my car and the girls followed me up, and we got to the campsite without incident. This campsite was 30 minutes away from any human signs of life outside of a shitty dirt road. The night started off fine with everyone getting completely trashed and me beating one of the girls I brought named Sarah at beer pong. And she was very drunk and all over me. I guess to the 18-year-old version of me, that night could not have been going better at that point. At about 12:30, things started to die down as half of us had already puked and were headed in for the night, and I was much too drunk to even try and mess with Sarah. A lot of the night is still a blur, but I remember climbing into a tent, and there were 5 of us in it, 3 guys and 2 girls. At around 2:30 a.m., I was awakened by the sound of a shotgun. I was very drunk and had a hard time processing anything. But in my drunken state, I figured it was one of the people I was camping with being an ass. One of the guys, Brent, had stayed sober the entire night and had brought his shotgun up with him, so I figured it was him being a prick to everyone who was drunk. I checked my phone and go back to sleep. I fell asleep in what I think was around 3 a.m. I was awoken by someone bawling their eyes out, and I am still having a hard time processing anything. About 5 minutes later, I realize it's Brent, and I stumble out of my tent, followed by Jeremy, and I walk up and see Brent is bleeding profusely from his nose and mouth. I run over to him, stumbling the entire time. I am then hit in the head with a rock and knocked unconscious. Everything from this point forward is from Jeremy's point of view. Jeremy, to this day, is my best friend and has told me his vision of the story many times. He says I passed out by a tree and a large man lunges out and smashes my face with a rock. After hitting me, the man lunges at Jeremy and tackles him straight on his ass. Jeremy at the time was 5'8", 140 pounds, and describes the man as at least 6'4", 280 pounds. Jeremy is being choked to death by this wooden monster of a man, and he hears another gunshot from a pistol. Sarah had managed to find a pistol Brent had also brought with him and fired a shot, missing the man by a large amount, but it managed to startle him and he sprinted off into the woods. Jeremy drove me and Brent to the hospital. I had 3 broken teeth and a severe concussion, and Brent had part of his tongue mutilated with a knife. and a broken nose. Brent has never talked to me or any of my friends from that trip about what exactly happened when he was outright alone with the man and refused to give the police much of a description. The man was never caught, and I have never been in the deep forest again. So Cozy Woodlands, man, let's not meet ever again. If you are new, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me out. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back and thank you for subscribing.